Because understanding great literature is better than trying to read and understand yet another business book. On the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, we commit to reading, dissecting, and analyzing the great books of the Western canon. You know, those books, from Jane Austen to Shakespeare, and everything else in between that you might have fallen asleep trying to read in high school. We do this for our listeners, the owner, the entrepreneur, the manager, or the civic leader who doesn't have the time to read, dissect, analyze, and leverage insights from literature to execute leadership best practices in the confusing and chaotic postmodern world we all now inhabit. Welcome to the rescuing of Western civilization at the intersection of literature and leadership. Welcome to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast. Hello, my name is Hassan Sorrells, and this is the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast bonus. There's no book reading usually on these bonus episodes. These are, in general, interviews, rants, raves, insights, and other gentle and sometimes not so gentle audio musings and conversations with interesting people about leadership. Because listening to me and an interesting guest talk about leadership for at least a couple of hours is better than reading and trying to understand yet another business book. And today, of course, because I created the format, we're going to break the format. I feel like Pablo Picasso a little bit. We're going to break our rule about covering business books. And we are going to talk today about another business book, following on the heels of our most recent bonus episode conversation around The Fourth Turning by William Strauss and Neil Howe, and The End of the World is Just the Beginning by Peter Zeihan. Sometimes there is a business book about leadership that is so good that as a person in leadership development space, I sit back while reading it, I nod my head, and I say to myself, damn, I wish I had written this. The book we are talking about today is easily one of the top 5 business and leadership books written in the last 10 years. And it was written by a former, never ex, as I've been informed, a former Navy SEAL and current podcast host whose name you'll know when I say it. This book details how lessons learned from over 20 years of military experience can be put to use in the corporate world, in the business world, and even in the civic and family world. It also shows that military culture can be just as screwed up, just as dysfunctional, and just as in need of change as any culture, civilian or otherwise, operating outside of the military. And we are going to take somebody, or we're going to be joined, we're going to be joined on our journey through this book today by a guest who is the #1 best-selling author in 13 Amazon categories, a 5-time worldwide bestseller for books in leadership. He's a top 40 under 40 candidate in tech and innovation, a Bronze Star Medal winner for meritorious service in war zones, from service in Iraq and Afghanistan. And he was a White House Military Officer of the Year. And if that's not enough, a TEDx South Lake Tahoe speaker. I would like to welcome to the podcast today, Atlas Aultman. How you doing, Atlas?
Hey, Hassan. Man, I said it before, but I got to say it again, man. Your voice is so silky smooth. I couldn't wait until you got into, introducing me so that I could interrupt it for a second to just realize if it was in a dream or if it was real life. And I pitched myself a couple times while you're doing the intro. Thanks for having me on the show. I love your show. I love all the content that you put out. You put a lot of work into this, and man, you are right. It is way better to listen to you on a book and listen to you and a guest on a book than it is reading a book. It's like when you read a book and then you go see the movie.
Right.
You're like, well, the podcast said more. So,
well, and it's interesting because I'm a huge movie guy. Just as an aside,
yep.
I am a huge movie guy, and in my more recent regular episode podcasts, I've been talking a lot about the intersections of film and books and all that. And I've been trying. I had good discipline the first couple of years, keeping all that out, but it's starting to leak in a little bit. So I got to tighten up. A little bit. But I'm a huge film guy. Huge.
I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love content in general. So thanks for having me, Hassan. I appreciate this, man. This is gonna be awesome. You ready?
Absolutely. Let's jump into it. let's as the author would say, let's get some.
Yeah.
Let's get after it. So
Let's get
today,
after it.
we will be talking about extreme ownership, how U.S. Navy SEALs lead and win, by Jocko, Willink, and Leif Babin. So I have the black cover today. If you're watching on the video, Atlas has two different versions. He has the white cover and he has the black cover version. So he is doubling up on his ownership, such as it were. Now, Extreme Ownership opens. And again, you can go get this book. I would encourage you to go pick it up. Extreme Ownership opens with part 1, Winning the War Within. And so we're going to do something that we've been doing on our podcast recently, where we've been sort of summarizing some of the chapters and summarizing some of the content and giving you a broad overview of what's in the book, because obviously we can't cover everything in the book. And also, you know, we like to talk with the guests, particularly one like Atlas, who's very well versed in the content, but also very well versed in how it applies to our real leadership lives. So the very first chapter opens up in the Malab district in Ramadi in Iraq. And Jocko describes what exactly extreme ownership actually means through the lens of a blue on blue, through the lens of a fratricide. Now, war is a dirty business. William Tecumseh Sherman said that, and you cannot make it any better. And the first chapter opens up with what exactly ownership actually means in a place where winning and losing is not about the balances on an account sheet. It's actually about the blood in the streets and people's lives. From there, we move into, or Jocko moves into the idea of no bad teams and only there being bad leaders, which is an important distinction with a difference that many people fail to make in all sorts of leadership realms. And when I was thinking about this book and when I was reading it, a very particular story that I'm going to tell here in just a moment really resonated, really made this piece of the book resonate with me. He moves towards this idea of belief. And this is an idea, this is a concept in part 1 that really focuses around the need of the team to believe in the mission and really embedding that belief, not only in the team, but making sure that leaders actually articulate that vision, articulate that belief to the team. And finally, part 1 of Extreme Ownership ends with, with the co-author, Leif Babin. I believe this is Leif's part. No, it was actually Jocko's part. Sorry. With Jocko talking about probably the most important aspect of any leadership act or any leaders act, and that is the aspect of checking the ego. And we're going to talk about all of these different aspects today with Atlas. But I want to kind of talk a little bit about a story that occurred to me when I was reading part 1. So, and I've never talked about this on the podcast before, but many years ago, when I was in an administrative position in higher education, and most of my career, the first part of it anyway, before I started my leadership consultancy and started doing a whole bunch of the other things like this podcast that I'm doing now, I spent a lot of time in higher education, training and leading teams of anywhere between 12 to 50, 18 to 19-year-olds. And what I tell people very often, particularly if I'm in a corporate training scenario, when I'm teaching and leading and training 45 to 60-year-olds, is that the only difference between you and the 19-year-olds is the number of years. Because y'all have the same kind of stuff going on, same kind of challenges. Well, many years ago, back in 2012, well over 10 years ago now, I was leading a team of college students that collapsed. And it was a leadership failure on my part, actually. And it took a lot for me to understand why the team failed. Now, I was hired, of course, to fire somebody on the team. And of course, I did that part successfully, but I didn't realize that one of the dichotomies of leadership, and we're going to talk a lot about this later on. Jocko talks about this Jocko and Leif both talk about this in their book, and it is one of the principles of extreme ownership. But one of the dichotomies of leadership is you could do the right thing, but you could do it with the wrong motives. Actually, there's something biblical in there as well. I failed to check my ego, with that team. And it turned out that because I failed to check my ego, even in the manner in which I fired that person, I turned out to be a bad leader, which created a toxic team. I failed to get people to buy in and to believe in the mission overall of that team. And it was a pretty substantially large team. I mean, my 25 student leaders, all of whom are 19 years old, all of whom were looking to me for leadership, and I was not providing it. As a result, I had to check myself. I had to check my ego after some good counsel from a supervisor of mine. I had to check my ego. And then I had to constantly retake ownership over the team for the remaining year and a half that I was with that team. All of the aspects of extreme ownership that I failed on, that Jocko talks about in his experience with the SEAL teams in Iraq and in Ramadi, I had those exact same experiences, just in a different kind of way, and experienced the exact same kind of thing. And I'm sure Atlas is going to talk a little bit about some of his experiences today as it relates to extreme ownership, bad teams and bad leaders, believing and checking the ego, of course. And so I'd like to turn it over to him with this question just to start. Atlas, this is a very Jocko question, so we're going to start here. How can leaders win the war within? How does that happen?
Well, I mean, it starts off with exactly what you just said. It starts off with checking your ego. So the story that I'm going to share with your audience is one that I don't share too often, but it's an extreme story that mixes a special mission with presidential support and diplomacy. And it was when I realized that I could be different and I could win the war within. And it goes like this. I was in Afghanistan for a long time, and I realized that there's a lot of violence there. I was in Iraq for a long time, and I realized that there was a lot of violence there. And in college, I was a bouncer. I used to fight a lot. I come from a family that said, if you get into a fight, you come back as a winner or you get into another fight. My whole life, I've answered with violence. But in Indonesia, I was on a presidential mission. And a lot of the things that Jocko and Leif talk about, they kind of roll into this. I had to take extreme ownership of this situation because I had the responsibility of bringing the president's communication device into this peace conference. And the security guard, who I didn't know was a security guard, told me it wasn't coming in. And I was like, it's coming in. I'm bringing in my device for the president of the United States. They're like, no, it isn't. So I asked him what I needed to do. And after jumping through a lot of hoops that he didn't think I could jump through, I had a diplomatic note from the State Department, which is an agreement between countries to bring in this device specifically. And he was mad. So he ushered me into this back room, and he's wearing this black outfit, right? All black. And it looked like a uniform, but I didn't really realize it was a uniform until I was in a room with a whole bunch of dudes in black uniforms all around me. And I have this device. So I did what I always do. But this is what you do whenever you're in a situation where you think violence is about to ensue. You put your hands up. Mm-hmm. You go into guard. Huh? You know all about guard. We're probably going to go talk about some guard a little bit later. But you go into guard. That way you know something's coming. So I put my hands up and I said, hey, I don't know why I'm here. And he swung and hit me right in the face. Now, I just told you I'm a man that answers violence with violence. But as I looked down after I got clocked in the face, I saw this word, diplomat, and it was on my chest. I was wearing a suit. I was not able to fight. I'm not able to. The agency that I work for told me if I ever got into a violent confrontation, I was going to get kicked out of the agency. And it took me years to get into this position that I was in to work directly for the president of the United States. So I had this war inside me. Okay. It just brewed up. And I had this emotional onset that I've never had before as I pushed the guy off and I grabbed the device and left the room. Immediately, Cameras went my direction. People saw it. And then I got the call. What just happened? And I was like, hey, I'll tell you when you get here. And they're like, are you okay? And I was like, yeah. So just like in the story where this top leadership was coming to the scene, to the X where I was, same thing happened with me. They're coming and they want to know what happened. What did I do? What did my team do? What happened specifically? And like all of this, I left the team out of all of this. The team went in, did everything that they were supposed to do. They were in the venue. I handled everything from the point of conflict because I'm used to doing that. So when they showed up, they asked me to go through this, and then I had to struggle. Unlike Jocko, I went through all of the emotions. I asked the team, whatever he did, the same thing. I asked the team, is there something we could have done better? Nobody's going to give me any answers on that because everyone feels at fault that I just got hit in the face, And instead of them trying to come on and figure out how they were a part of it, I just immediately shut that down because I'd already read this book. I had read the white version before it turned into the black version later. The black's #1 New York Times Center with Q&As. This is the big one. This is the book that I was like, I'm going to get the Q&As on this. But when I got there and the leadership came up to me, they said, what happened? And I said, hey, this is what happened. And I couldn't answer with violence. And then the SEAL, the president's military aide was a SEAL at that day. And I'm looking at his trident and like, I just, I can see what they go through to get that trident, to wear that trident. And it's a lot. It's a lot. So he's looking at me like, why didn't you hit the guy? And he knows that I couldn't have. So he just walks away. And like, I felt a little wet thing pop out of my eye. And I'm like, all of a sudden I'm crying. I have no idea why I'm crying. And I'm like, okay, so I put that back. And then I'm angry. So I went through anger, fear that I was going to lose my job. And then like I squirted one. I don't cry. So I didn't know what the heck was happening. I wasn't working out. My eyes were just pushing out this bubble that I couldn't understand. And all of that came back to, the higher brass came down and they said, hey, let's keep him in the job. He did the right thing. And then they got me paired with a diplomatic response agent because I'm not a politician. I don't know what I'm doing. Right. So they put some professional in there and the guy was like, hey, we're going to go see this guy. He's going to apologize. I need you to say, yeah, I accept your apology. Then we're walking away. And you know how that went. The guy was like, hey, I'm a Christian. I'm like, wow, dude, well, Christians don't hit other Christians. Christians don't hit people, but I accept your apology. And then I walked away and the political aide was like, oh my gosh, that was amazing. Like I'd been trained for years to say that kind of stuff. I was just, you know what I mean? I was just me. And the whole thing is like, whenever you read a good book, and this is why I think we're talking about it, when you read a good book and you take it and you're like, how can I apply what he did, which was a grandiose scale? I mean, somebody died under his watch. Right. And he was like, it's my responsibility. Yep. No one died in my situation. I got clocked in the face, but still my job was on the table. The president's movements and how he was going to act and how he was able to do his presidential duties. They were all on my shoulders and there's no fail. So I had a different type of stress that was still really high that I had to work through. And it was a war within, man. It was a war within. Do I blame somebody else? This dude hit me for no reason. I could have said that. That would have been stupid. But like I obviously had my hands up. I don't know. Right. Maybe I provoked something. So honesty is the best policy, all of that. But the other part to this whole chapter that I got to end on is Leif says it in there. He said, there's no bad teams, only bad leaders. And he talks about the boat example where they had these SEAL team training scenarios where one team was always losing and one team was always winning, and they flopped the leaders, and the team that was losing became like the winning team. And like the winning team was #2, but the leaders matter. And the whole thing is extreme ownership. When you realize that your environment is controlled by you, if there's struggles, you have to get through it. You have to figure out what's going on. And nobody's going to help you, man. No one's going to help you through the hard times. It's in you to get through that situation. And when you start looking in, the battle becomes a whole lot better. Sun Tzu puts it this way in The Art of War. If you know your enemies, you'll win half of the battles. If you know yourself, you'll win half the battles. If you know yourself and the enemy, you'll win 100% of the battle. But here's the war within. The enemy is usually yourself. You talk to yourself more than anyone else talks to you in your life. The voice that you hear the most is you. That voice should be positive, especially in conflict. You know, when I was crying, I didn't think, "Oh my gosh, I'm crying. Oh, how embarrassing." I was like, "Why am I crying?" Immediately I attacked it. Like, why is this happening? And then I realized I'm going through something. My body's trying to figure out what's going on because we didn't just pretzel the guy we normally would have pretzeled.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? I
Right.
couldn't get into the way I normally solve problems. And my body's like, why couldn't we just do that? And why couldn't we just
Why couldn't we
crush
engage with
this
that
guy?
muscle memory?
Yeah. What is happening to you? Are you okay? And it's like going through all of the emotions. And like that's a real war. And we all have it. So what a great question to ask, because it really is a war within, and you have to own it. And that's what the book talks about. That's what my book talks about. And that's basically all my book talks about, is like putting the right people in and around your environment to where they influence you to be better, to be bigger, to be the best version of you. And whenever you realize that's on you too, your network changes and you start to become somebody that people don't recognize. The kid that everyone used to talk to and be like, you know, that kid, he can't, whatever. They don't say that anymore. That stops because you focus in on what you were specifically made to do. And that niche is what some people call it. It's inside you, man, but it's different with everybody. And that is why leadership is a $1 billion a day business. $1 billion a day is being spent on how to fix leadership. And that's because they can't. Everyone's got a different mode. Everyone's got a different leadership opinion. So whenever you start realizing that and you start looking in to how you can lead, not how someone else can lead, but use someone else's lessons to become a better version of you, that's when you start winning that war within. What do you think about that?
Oh, I think that's exactly correct. Several things occurred to me while you were talking. I was taking notes. So, um, you know, one of the things that I wrote about in my third book, 12 Rules for Leaders, The Foundation of Intentional Leadership, is that leadership is like pornography. Everyone knows what it is when they can spot it, and everyone knows what it's not when they don't see it.
That's so true.
And that's why leadership is, to your point, $1 billion a day, industry. That's why there are over 400,000 plus volumes on Amazon.com just in the leadership category alone. And what people are searching for is how their individual lived experiences, and this is what is done so brilliantly in Extreme Ownership, and in your books and in my books, how can your lived experiences scale up, right? What's the ways that they can go to a much larger world? And that's something that I want to ask you about, because you mentioned something in there in that great story about the Indonesia presidential mission and the dudes in the black uniforms and having to jump through all those hoops.
Dude, let me tell you too. Like the guys that I was with that were from
Yeah.
the country, they were like, "Don't mess with them. They'll bury you. They'll kill you." And I was like, "I kill them. I ain't happening." But I didn't even think about any of that.
It's gonna be a close.
No.
It's gonna be a close run thing.
We're gonna find out.
We're gonna find out. I want to ask you a little bit about your background so that people can get to know you a little bit more. So, how do you go from being a bouncer in college to being in the diplomat corps, in Indonesia? What's that life path? How does that happen?
Yeah.
And you can give me either the 10-minute soliloquy version, or you can give me the 5-minute condensed version, however you want to do it. But how do you go? Because a lot of people would be interested in that.
Yeah.
How I'm interested in that. Heck, that's why I'm asking the question. How do you go from bouncer to diplomat? Like, what series of decisions was made that got you into that room? Because no one was in that room by accident, not even you.
Dude, no, it's very, very, very selective on who comes into that environment. Very selective. Okay, yeah. So early on in my life, I started watching TV like everyone else, looking for man examples. And one of the man examples that I always got was Rogan, man. Rogan used to be the person that would stand up to someone when they were wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And he had that confidence that, look, man, you're wrong. You're just wrong. And people were like, no, I'm not wrong. And they would get emotionally charged. And then Rogan would correct because he could. He had the ability physically to stop anything that was happening, but that he was controlling intellectual, but he was controlled until he didn't have to be. And
Mm-hmm.
someone would press that button, he would answer the call. So I started looking at him and other like movie examples, man. I mean, my mom, I talk about it on TED Stage. My mom used to put me in these scenarios where she would send me she would have me read books or watch movies that had strong leaders in them. And what I found in strong leaders was a physical health acumen. Like every strong leader was actually strong.
Mm-hmm.
Now, whether it was physical or intellectual, the strength, that component was needed.
Mm-hmm.
So I found myself at a very early age, and when my adopted dad told me, it was like, hey, you're a strong kid. So I found myself gravitating towards the violent side of
Mm-hmm.
strength, towards what can I do? So I took martial arts as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
I took in all the stuff we all do, right? All the
Yeah.
stuff, the sports and stuff. And then that turned into what I wanted to do in my life, which at freaking 3 years old, my grandpa was in special forces.
Mm-hmm.
He had me around a bunch of special forces people. I always wanted to be in special forces. So my mom kind of always put me in that environment. And then whenever it was my choice,
Mm-hmm.
and I had been studying all of the leadership decisions because really that was where I was as a kid. I was interested in how people make these decisions.
Mm-hmm.
I found the 5W model, right? Who, what, where,
Mm-hmm.
when, and why to be used
Yep.
everywhere. And then I thought it was really fancy because I added how. So I had like 6 things, and I'd be like, and I'd be like, boom, we're doing this. Strong voice.
Right.
And and so I started looking at my scenarios of where I was going to go, and I was going to go in the Army because that's where
Mm-hmm.
Special Forces is. And my dad was in the Army. He was in the Special Forces community as well, my adopted dad. And he said, no, go in the Air Force. And he's like, it's going to be better for you. You're going to have all these jobs that you're going to be able to do what you want to do in the Air Force. So I went through the Air Force. I got selected to be an officer, which is a full-time leader. That's
Mm-hmm.
what Jocko and Leif were doing. They were commanding. And this is what my mom really wanted me to do anyway. She wanted me to be a leader in future wars. She named me Joshua Michael, and she used to frequently tell me that stands for leader of warriors.
Mm-hmm.
Joshua, after Moses was a
Mm-hmm.
strong
Yep.
leader in the Bible, right? And
Yep.
then with Michael being the general of God's armies, we were a
Mm-hmm.
big Catholic family. So she's like, this is what your name means. I want you to be a leader of warriors. Not
Yep.
standard what you hear from my mom, but that's what my mom
Right.
used to say. So so whenever I came up to my
Mom,
mom and
mom was a warrior in and of herself. She was one of those Spartan women. You either come back on
yeah,
your shield or like, buried with it.
yeah. Yeah, so all of that transpired into me going into the Air Force and really making her. She got mad. She got so mad because she wanted to be an Army brat as an Army
Yeah.
child. She wanted to be an Army spouse, which she was, and then she wanted to be
Yeah.
an Army mother. She wanted to have like an Army life, and I went
Yeah.
into the Air Force. And before she passed away, she saw me at the White House leading soldiers,
Mm-hmm.
and that was a special mission. So, like transferring through my career, special things allowed themselves or afforded opportunities for me to go into unique environments like the White House. And
Yeah.
that was one of the special missions that I got to do after doing special missions in Iraq. So I did special missions in Iraq. Then they brought me into this environment called Combat Com, and I was in the mob, is what they call it. And combat communications is a group that goes out and takes over a field, sets up an airstrip, and then has the airfield come in so that we start wars. That's how that
Okay.
works.
Got it.
So I was doing that, and then we started a worldwide one because the community got bigger because of the things that were going on in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I spent lots of time, man, doing that. And I went from being in Iraq, winning a Bronze Star, like you told the earlier, and that's not something the Air Force gets. That's an Army medal
Mm-hmm.
for like the beginning of that says while engaged with the enemy. That's not something that you get in the Air Force. Usually, you don't get a medal that says while engaged with the enemy
Right.
if you're in
Yeah.
the Air Force.
Yeah.
So that's an Army medal, and I got that. And my mom was pretty proud of that because
Mhm.
my grandpa had a Bronze Star, he had a Purple Heart. I didn't want one of those,
Yeah,
but
no, no.
he did the Mac VSOC thing. So
Yeah.
all of that transpired into the opportunity to go assess to be at the White House, and that took 2 years. And I went through lots of background checks. My security clearance had to be what they call a presidential security clearance.
Hmm.
So I had to have carte blanche. They had to do a ton of research on me, and then assessments, and then tests, and all that. And then I got brought into the team, but not the team that was around the president, just the team. And
Just the
then I
same.
got to
Yeah.
work, around the president, which is that one I told you. And then 2 years later, I started working on the president's staff as one of the top five people in the agency to go represent. And that was interesting. Living at the White House was fun.
So we've had folks on this podcast before with extensive military experience. We last year we covered or last season, sorry, season two, we covered the book About Face by Colonel David Hackworth
Yeah.
with a good friend of
Yep.
mine who did a couple tours in Iraq and a tour in Afghanistan as well. Another one of our somewhat regular co-hosts. Was a graduate of West Point and did a tour in Iraq, right? And so one of the things that you and I had talked about before we pressed record on this was, and I want to say this early, um, what we're seeing happen right now in, I would say, the last 5 or 6 years,
Yeah.
and it's really started to speed up after the Afghanistan withdrawal. What you're starting to see is all of those men who, like yourself, Jocko, the three people, the two people, three people that I've named already, starting to come out and starting to really say to the civilian world, hey, we have this military experience. We have this military background. You should really pay attention to us. And it seems like it's on a sharper edge, primarily because of a couple of things, I think. And you don't necessarily have to respond to this, it's just an observation.
Okay.
Primarily, I think because of the politics around Iraq and Afghanistan that were sharply different than the politics around everything that it's always compared to, which is Vietnam, or even the first Persian Gulf War. And then you also have a good chunk of people who are my age. I'm 45 this year, who are my age, who are, quite frankly, self-consciously determined not to do the same things and not to have the same sort of social and cultural responses to folks like yourself and Jocko and all of that and all those folks, not have the same cultural responses as our parents did to folks in their time. We're hyper self-conscious about that.
Sure.
And that's where you get the thank you for your service kind of stuff and all of that, right?
Yeah.
And I get it that it sounds flat when you hear it because it's just a job. And at the same time, when only less than 1% of the available male population serves in the United States now. Forget World War II, that's just gone. Less than 1% of the available male population served in Iraq and Afghanistan. When we run across somebody who's speaking from that space, like a Jocko, like you, like the folks that I brought onto this podcast before, we run across people who are speaking from that space. We do as a generation sit up and listen. And quite frankly, folks who are younger than us, where the military participation rate is even lower, okay, also sit up and pay attention. And so I think that I know that there's some real leadership value in those experiences that, again, the military isn't, and let's not put it up on a pedestal. It is another sphere of how we operate in the world, but there are lessons that can be brought across from that sphere. That's why we're talking to you and covering this book today.
Well, so the military is the largest organization in the world when it comes to people employed, how much is spent, land, buildings, like assets. So like the military itself is the biggest corporation, if you want to think about it in those terms. And lessons pulled out of that environment usually have a life or death consequence. So I can see where the lessons are, but I got to be careful, like who I'm listening to, because what's happened is, especially in the last couple of years, people have transferred into becoming thought leaders without actually producing thoughts that are fully developed. So when you start to latch onto something that isn't ready, and you start to go with it, you have half-baked ideas that come out, and those half-baked ideas are dangerous.
Right.
So like whenever you have like I was really careful, and I used a couple people's books, Jocko and Leif were one of them, but I used a couple books to like get through the process, because the Department of Defense has to clear your book to make
Right.
sure that you're not, divulging any operational secrets. And I'm pretty cake when I don't talk anything operations. I talk personal experience, right?
Right.
So my personal experience doesn't talk about operations most of the time. So I was very careful to take things that actually were fully developed and put them in a book.
Mhm.
I'm very careful of what I speak, like the story that I share with you. I don't share that too often, but whenever I do, that's fully developed, so
Mhm.
that you can realize you're going to go through something hard. It may not be what I went through, but you're going to go through something hard, and your body and your emotions are going to flare. And when they do, realize it, and then realize you can control it. That's the lesson that I like to, that's a fully developed lesson. You know what I mean? I don't share things that aren't
Yeah.
fully developed.
No,
And it's hard.
I love that. I love that idea that half-baked ideas are dangerous.
Yeah.
And I love it how you tied that directly to this idea that you compared the military to a corporation. And of course, going back to Eisenhower, the military industrial complex,
Yep.
yada yada yada, we know. Okay. Um, still, social spending is still more in the United States than military spending is, but I won't get into all that. Anyhow,
It's true. It's very true. Like there's more money
um,
in corporations than there ever will be in the military. Trust me.
yeah, exactly. But just looking at the military as a corporate entity, just like in any other corporate entity, taking that idea to its logical conclusion, you're going to have some people that are going to be at the pinnacle, at the peak of their powers, who are going to have fully baked ideas. You're going to have a bunch of people in the middle who have half-baked ideas, who are running around thinking their ideas are fully baked. And then you're
Always.
going to have an even larger mass of people at the bottom who have no ideas
Yeah.
and just want to ascend the hierarchical ladder, right? And will
Yeah.
say or do anything to get up that ladder. And so I agree. Like, we do have to be careful as people who are purveying leadership ideas to make
Yeah.
sure that our ideas aren't half baked, and make sure that they are fully thought through. And that's one of the reasons why I do this podcast. It's because it gives me an opportunity to talk through ideas with folks, reality check my ideas against not only a book, but also an interesting guest, and then see if this idea is actually real. Like, am I
Yeah.
actually seeing something that's real here, or am I just making it up as I go along? So,
It's true.
yeah.
Yeah.
One other thought, and then we'll go back to the book.
All right.
Um, you mentioned how most people engage in negative self-talk. And so
Yeah.
my master's degree is in conflict management and in conflict resolution, right? I did a lot of divorce and family mediations. I've done my fair share of tough negotiations. And we'll talk about a little bit more about this, but I was a fighter. I was a playground warrior from the time I was 12 till
That's right.
I stopped being a playground warrior, right?
Yeah. Right.
Sometimes I will say to people, I'm part of the last generation where we actually had real fist fights about
Yeah.
things,
I
like
think
real
that's
genuine
true.
fist fights.
People don't fight
Um,
anymore.
well, interestingly enough, I was in line, and this will kind of date this recording, but I was in line to vote yesterday, and there were two kids standing behind me, two young men standing behind me, and a young woman standing in front of me. And they both knew her from the local high school. They both all three of them just turned 18, and they were voting for the first time. And I was like, oh, okay. But they actually talked to each other. And I actually said this out loud while I was standing in line to them. And I was, of course, on my phone looking at email. And I look up from the email and I go, wait, I thought people in your generation didn't talk to each other without phones. Like, this is
They're like, get your
insane.
phones out. This is crazy.
It's crazy. Oh, what is happening?
I can hear your voice.
And to their credit, the two young men behind me just started laughing. And the young lady, she kind of rolled her eyes, as most 18. I have an 18-year-old daughter. So, like, yeah, she's going to do that thing. Like, who's this weirdo talking to me? Right. But not one of them had their phones out. They were focused on what they needed to do and to be in line. And they're having a conversation later on as we move through the line about about something going on at their local high school. And I won't say where the locality is. It doesn't really matter. But about something going on at their local high school. And they said, the two boys were talking, and they said to each other, well, XYZ person, I don't remember the name, it doesn't matter. XYZ person punched that other person the other day, and then, like, the person who got punched, like apparently rolled up to this other person later on and like waylaid him.
Wow.
Like waylaid him totally. And so they were talking about it. And then the girl in front of me, she starts laughing and she starts telling them about what she heard about this. Oh,
Wasn't
oh,
it?
and so she starts telling them what she heard about this interaction. And I I got to admit, my heart kind of warmed a little bit. Got to admit, and that's terrible of me. I know it is, but I was like, at least at some point, people aren't just social media warriors. At
Yeah.
some point, it does. You can hit that Mike Tyson, sort of idea that everybody's strong online, but at a certain point, you're gonna get punched in the mouth.
Yeah. And no one has a plan.
And no one has a plan. No one has a plan for that. And so weirdly enough, it sort of warmed my heart. So that's an interesting little aside there. I had to tell that story because that happened to me yesterday. Because I do often feel like we are part of that last cohort where physical confrontation for the words that come out of your mouth, there's going to be an escalation there. And the skill set of being an adult in conflict management is learning how to de-escalate from that, or not to allow it to get to that. And that's where, to tie this all into self-talk, that's where your self-talk has to come in. And so the great Zig Ziglar once said years ago, the motivational speaker Zig Ziglar said, almost 99% of our internal conversation is negative. And we need to switch the gears on that. And of course, scientific research and psychological research on that has proven that the vast majority of our self-talk is negative. Now, SEALs, Special Forces, Air Force, Special Forces folks, one of the ways that they teach or train, and you probably went through this, is reinforcing positive self-talk versus negative self-talk. Let's talk a little bit about that, and then we'll go back to the book. But talk a little bit about that. How do we switch our self-talk so it's more positive rather than negative?
Yeah. Well, so it depends on where you are and which environment, but there's a lot of things that come out of that special operations environment that breed positive influences. The way what I got to start off with though is there's a lot of negative self-talk in that environment too, because whenever you have a bunch of alpha people comparing each other to other alpha people, there's a negative connotation where someone might be faster, stronger, smarter in certain areas. So what the special operations community is really good at, and why we do really well, especially in the American Special Forces, is we start looking at everyone's strengths and we put them together and we make them a real tight-knit group. And then we put them on a mission after they've figured out who's strong at what, after they know where they belong. And then this talks, we'll go back into this probably a little bit later, but this talks about the decentralized command. If I know you're really good at something, I'm going to trust you to do it without question. And so you start looking at all those things. They ask you during the assessment process to come on any special operations team, like, what are you good at? The strengths and weaknesses questions that everyone gets in an interview, it's dissected at a very cellular level whenever you're assessing to be in a special operations environment. They make you take tests that are cognitive in nature to figure out things that you may not know about yourself. They make you take personality tests. They test the way you are from an EQ or an EI, emotional intelligence perspective. And then I like to breed all that into what I like to call, and this is still half baked, so be careful, emotional equity. And what that does is it builds up a certain amount of self-worth. So at night, I look at my schedule and I say, what did I do today? And the things that I didn't do normally would get like oh, you didn't get to it. I'm like, yes, I can do that better tomorrow. And I start to push that into an equity mode to where whenever I am ready to do like a podcast with you, and we talked a couple times, when I'm ready to do a podcast with you, it's going to be a good podcast. And so I know it's coming. And the build up to that, instead of the letdown, it works in an equity mode for me. I'm putting sweat equity into something that's going to be great when it comes out. I'm putting this equity in. So I move it into an equity bucket. and have an emotional equity. And I really learned that in the special operations, environments, because I got on these teams, man. And I'll probably talk about it a little bit, but if we go into chapter 11, um, I could hold off and tell you this story later. Or I could tell you
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, hold off, and tell us the story when we get to chapter 11, because
All
I want to
right.
hold on to that, because that's what is that, decisiveness and uncertainty, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's hold off and talk about that. Let's go back to
Okay.
the book. Yeah, let's hold off on that. Back to the book. Back to Extreme Ownership: How U.S. Navy SEALs Lead and Win by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin. By the way, you do need to check out Jocko's podcast. His podcast, quite frankly, was the inspiration for what I do here, except I read classic books. He's doing something a little bit more modern, but we're both pursuing, again, the same thing in the same direction, trying to promulgate. Ooh, that's a fancy word. Trying to promulgate fully baked ideas into
Yeah.
the world. So back to the book. So we got through part 1. So let's look at part 2, the laws of combat. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
in looking at the laws of combat and extreme ownership, this is divided up into 4 parts, right? And the first part opens up with Leif Babin describing covering the flank in South Central Ramadi, Iraq, and talking about what it means to engage in a process called cover and move, particularly a process of cover and move when you're in a retreat where, and I love saying this, it's almost a line from the movie Armageddon, when there are no good options, you just have to pick the best of all of the bad ones. And cover and move is an interesting idea where no one person is allowed to not be covered, but also no one person is allowed to stay static, right? And is allowed to merely nest in place. With cover and move, it allows a small team to engage in a fundamental tactic of breaking down silos and depending upon each other. It also encourages teams to develop trust. And Leif talks a lot about that in his application to business and the principle. Then from there, we move into this idea of simple, which was this chapter was written by Jocko. And simple is the idea that plan complexity defeats you. The most simple plan is the best one, as a matter of fact. And I'm gonna talk a little bit about jiu-jitsu. He paraphrases from his great pal and jiu-jitsu instructor and the great jiu-jitsu competitor Dean Lister in talking about how jiu-jitsu is simple but not easy, and I can testify to that. But plans should be as complex as they need to be, but no more complex. And that is something that a lot of leaders struggle with, because they fall in love with their own complexity, right? They become seduced by their own complexity. And Jocko breaks that down very effectively as an application to business in this chapter. Then from simple, we're moving to prioritization and execution, something you probably, if you listen to the Jocko podcast, you've heard him talk a lot about this. But prioritization and execution, this chapter was written by Leif, and it talks about how do you kill as many bad guys as possible with the U.S. Marines and the soldiers in Ramadi, and how do you do that when everything is going to hell, quite frankly, and all of the available options are exploding upon you at once as a leader, and when the massive pressure of a situation is pushing on you. Countless problems on the battlefield and in life snowball, each one becoming larger and larger and larger. How do you prioritize and execute? I'm going to talk a little bit about that, because my mom used to say something that I think Jocko would agree with, actually, on that one. And then finally, decentralized command, which you were just talking about with Alice. Decentralized command is the idea that the people below you as a leader need to be able to actually lead. But that's only half of it, right? Junior leaders need to know and need to have the confidence that you're actually going to support them as the senior leader. You're going to support them and trust them in their decision making. You're going to allow them to experience the consequences of their successes and failures. And I wrote about this in my book, 12 Rules for Leaders. you're going to allow them to not only experience the consequences and failures, but you're also going to avoid as a leader yourself what I call, this is my version, I guess, of decentralized command. You're going to avoid the blame credit trap, where leaders want to give away all the blame and take all the credit. Those are the laws of combat. That's in part 2 of extreme ownership. And I was going to talk a little bit about a couple of things that relate when I think of this chapter. So I've built teams before in my leadership consultancy, and I've worked with teams, obviously, in other contexts. And I built with teams working on projects. Most recently, I'm building a local team to do a podcast project for our local community, right? Really cool idea, doing an old-time radio show, because I'm a huge fan of those kinds of things, right? But I cannot do it all by myself. I need about 6 other people. 4 to 6 is usually the optimal team size. You cannot do everything at once as an entrepreneur. You cannot do everything at once. And I've been an entrepreneur almost my entire career. And the places where I have not been allowed to be an entrepreneur, I've struggled. But even inside that, when I've been an intrapreneur, I've realized that the biggest challenge to the team being the success is me. I'm the biggest challenge to the team being the success. Any leader is the biggest challenge to the team being the success, because if the leader doesn't check their ego, then there can't be cover and move. Plans can't be made simple. We cannot prioritize and execute because everything is in the number 1 slot all of the time. And we cannot have trust in order to effectively engage in decentralized command. My mom used to say that the number 1 slot is called number 1 for a reason, because only one thing can go in the number 1 slot. And then after that, you can have everything else. I think Jocko would agree. So would Leif. It's it's choosing what goes into that number 1 slot that's hard for us as leaders. And so the question I have for Atlas, after we look at laws of combat and thinking about your own experience and thinking about your own life, is how can leaders follow the laws of combat, that are described in part 2 here? And I think that this is the core of the book, these ideas of simple, decentralized command, prioritize and execute, and of course, cover and move. How can leaders apply those laws of combat to their leadership lives? Hello. So I'm going to do some shilling here, and hopefully this will be a pause in our riveting conversation for you. I have an offer for you. My most recent book is 12 Rules for Leaders, The Foundation of Intentional Leadership. It's available in paperback, hardcover, or as an ebook on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, and any other place you order books. Now, in this book, I address the 12 leadership areas that I have found leaders need to be the most intentional in to be the type of leader followers actually want to follow. From establishing a foundation of leading teams through managing conflict effectively, all the way through leading teams through change, knowing what to do and why to do it can help readers, like the ones listening to this show, become better leaders. Look, reading this book and living it is like getting coaching from me directly without having to pay my full coaching rate. Head on over to leadershiptoolbox.us. That's leadershiptoolbox.us, and scroll down the homepage and click on the Buy Now button to purchase in hardcover, paperback, and Kindle format on Amazon 12 Rules for Leaders, the foundation for intentional leadership. And that's it for me. Now back to the show.
I like it. Well, one of the parts of this book that I absolutely love is 2 words, and it's decisively engaged.
Mm-hmm.
That's not something people normally hear. Decisively engaged, as they describe, as Jocko describes, is whenever there is no good way out. Like, the only thing that can happen is you have to win or you die.
Right.
You can't get out of the building, and you can't get out on a road. You have to go through something. So what do you go through? And you pick the least worst option. That's what you're trained to do. That's what everything's trained to do. But I'm with you on that. These are the core principles that a leader must think about. Cover and move is how the people that you control, the people that you are in charge of, the people that are going to do the work, how do they operate? And in order to do that, what the book doesn't cover, which I'll add to it, which is something that I'm sure you have probably talked about whenever you're doing consulting, is what are these people passionate about?
Yep.
Because a lot of people get hired onto a team and then they never get asked, could they do more, or would they contribute in a different way if they were allowed to? And whenever you start asking those questions, you open the door to people doing more because they are empowered to do so. Unless you have that question, unless you have that question built in early, these people will only do what you hired them to do. And if they don't like doing it anymore, they're going to start sucking at it. So I'm with you. It's on the leader to figure out what their team is actually good at. And if you aren't a leader who asks that question, if you don't leave your mark with a question mark, which is, what are you passionate about? You're not going to ever know the full dynamic impact of your team.
Every team I've ever built, just want to insert here, every team I've ever built, every person I've ever hired, and you can, I mean, even down to a volunteer intern.
Yeah.
I would ask them, what do you want to contribute to this organization? Not what your goals are, because that's a different question.
That's a different question.
What do you want to contribute to this organization? What do you want to contribute to the team? And then I would ask them the follow-up question, how can I best help you make that happen?
Yeah.
And so many people who used to work with me on teams that I built and now have gone off to do other things with other teams, they've come back to me and they've said,
"I'd ask that question."
Yeah, exactly. They said, no one asked that question. I would tell them sometimes, even in the interview process, but a lot when I was working with them, I'm on purpose spoiling you for other roles. I'm doing it on purpose. Yes, I'm making you better, obviously. Even just a little tiny bit, even if it's just 1% better. But I want you to remember this experience when you go out and you have other experiences with other folks. Because guess what? I know enough to know it's not going to be like that everywhere else.
It's so true. That's so good. But you as a leader, it's on you to make them leaders.
Right.
And you're doing that with that question, because if you're not asking that question, they're not going to think about it in the shower or while they're driving down the street or doing their exercises.
No.
But when you plant that seed, they start thinking about it, and then they start figuring out who they really are. And that is powerful. So that is the one that I would say, cover and move. Figure out how people can cover so that you can move. That's the business application to what they're saying. Keep it simple, stupid. The KISS theory is talked about, and that's the next part, right? And I like what your mom said. You're the number one spot. There's only one place for one thing there. Yeah, I heard it said another way recently on another show. It says, keep first things first and everything else never. Because whenever you focus on one thing and that's gone, the next first thing comes up.
So I'm going to relate a story here very briefly. Recently in my family, there's been some health issues with a relative of mine. I'm going to hash some information here. That way identifying information isn't out there in the public. There's been a health issue with a family member of mine, immediate family member. And it's been causing stress to my wife, right? Yeah. And this is anybody who's ever had anything happen with their health and a family member knows that that's one of the most trying, stressful, sharp, kind of things that can happen to you.
Everyone's got a lot of problems until they have health problems, and they got one.
Yeah, exactly. Then they got one. But even in how my wife approached me on this, how to solve this problem, she was extremely stressed, crying, distraught, was gathering a bunch of information to try to fix the problem herself, which is, she's taking ownership. And the first thing I did was listen. And that's a key aspect, I think, that when Jocko talks about this idea of prioritizing and executing.
Yeah.
When Jocko and Leif talk about this, I think the first role of the leader is to listen, not to
Mm,
solve the problem, to listen for what the number one problem should be that needs to be solved. What
it
is the
is.
first thing that goes in that slot? Because that's the hardest thing to determine. The hardest thing to determine isn't the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Like the ordering is easy
Hmm. Hmm.
after you determine what's number one, and then all the other dominoes begin to fall.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
am I incorrect in that?
No, that's absolutely true. Brian Tracy is the one person that talks about goals. Now, I have a different aspect on what goals are.
Mhm.
I don't believe in goals. I don't believe in New Year's resolutions. I believe in targets. So I'll take you through Brian Tracy's mindset. What he would have everyone do is get out a piece of paper, and I do this too,
Mhm.
and write down everything you want, even if it's ice cream. Put it
Mhm.
all on paper, and then look at your list and see what would change your life if it could be magically given to you right now. Whatever that is, whatever would change your life the most if it could be given to you. Like, you have a genie and he's going to give you one wish. Boom, which one is it? That's your number one. And that's how he does goals.
Mhm.
And the way I do it is similar. I said, put it all down. Now it's real. Now your subconscious starts to work on it because you've made it something that belongs in the world. And now internally, you're going to see your wheels spinning because of that Harvard study, right? In the 80s, where they're like, how many people have goals? How many people wrote them down? Well, the people who had goals were making 10 times more. And the people who had them written down were making, 50 to 100 times more because they wrote them down, became real. So I take that and I make that the target. Whatever your target is, whatever your one target is, you can only shoot at one target at a time.
Mhm.
Whatever your target is, whenever you hit the target, you can do this. Do I need to hit it again or to make it more refined, or should I move on to the next target?
Mhm.
And so Brian Tracy talks about that. Write it all down, and then whatever can be magically given to you, that's your number one target. Yeah, I believe that. But whenever you write it down, you had that feeling like I need to knock that out. Just writing it down, getting it on paper is one thing, but then you push that into a target. And then all these other things become secondary, third targets, not high value. These are low value targets. Your high value target is the one that will change your life. And if you have health problems, it's always health. Everyone
Mhm.
has a lot of problems until they have health problems, and then it goes right to first. Because without health, you're not living life to your fullest, and you know it. And it's a hard thing to get through. And people who do, like I had a battle with skin cancer, and whenever I got through skin cancer, I started becoming more productive. I
Mhm.
was way more. I wrote my books. I got on stages. You know what I mean? But I don't
Yeah.
tell people. This is probably the first time I've ever told anybody that I had skin cancer. It's just something I had something that I was working on. People are like, "You okay?" I'm like, "I'm fine. I
Right.
want to talk." You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Well, and it's Jocko kind of touches on this in when he's talking about this idea of prioritizing and executing. He kind of touches around the edges of it, but he doesn't go directly to it because I think he assumes the reader will just get it.
Yeah.
And maybe he's fleshed it out a little bit in subsequent podcast episodes. I'm sure he has, because you can see it everywhere. But in prioritization and execution, the thing that flummoxes or stops people from prioritizing and executing
Yeah.
is confusion about what the target is, which is to your point about
Always.
Brian Tracy, right? It's also confusion about, and Jordan Peterson talks a little bit about this too. It's confusion about the hierarchy of values. What's
Mm-hmm.
at the bottom of the hierarchy and what's at the top? And many people, this is why one of the things we talked about on this podcast last year when we covered the Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn and Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky, two heavy books, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but what you find in both of those books is the solution at the beginnings of the solution to the crisis of meaning we currently have in the West. And the crisis of meaning we currently have is because, or I think, is fundamentally due to people's misordered hierarchies.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
we have a hierarchy, and we don't ever want to publicly admit this, but we
No, I mean, I could
privately,
totally see that.
yeah, we
Yeah.
privately walk it out, or not privately, sorry, we publicly walk out what we don't privately admit to ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Yeah.
what we don't admit is we've got a lot of stuff that's number one in the hierarchy for us personally, but we're either too ashamed, or we don't understand, or we're not that self-aware, to your point earlier, about what's in that number one slot. And we don't turn and face it. To your point, we're not decisively engaged with what that number one thing is.
Nope.
We don't have our North Star. And because we don't have that, everything else is then misordered. Yeah. And then we wonder why our families are off the rails, or our communities are off the rails, or our country is off the rails. Well, it's because things are fundamentally misordered. Now, if you don't know what's in the number one slot, then prioritization and execution can't happen, because you're constantly in a space of chaos.
Yeah. And you can organize chaos, but it takes time to figure that out. And that's what he talks about, the fog of war, right?
Correct.
Everyone's got the fog of war. Now, my master's degree is in war theory and national defense strategy. So whenever it comes to war and that conflict that you just described, that exists in that environment. Like, you're supposed to be able to thrive in chaos. But realistically, it's prioritizing in chaos. And then you execute whatever that priority is. That's the only thing you can do. So you're right. When people are all confused and they start to set all these crazy things, they get overwhelmed and stressed out, and they become bigger people because they're stress eating, or they stop working out, or, name it, don't sleep. I mean, they become bigger people, but not in the way they want to be.
Right.
Because of chaos. It's understandable. It's understandable. But yeah, back to this, you're right. It's a core process, like prioritize and execute. Huge deal. Huge deal. The way I talk about it in my book, Rule of 3, is people cannot do more than 3 things. If you give somebody more than 3 things, that's too much. Yeah. If you're trying to sell somebody something and you say, I can do 4 things for you, well, that's great. That's a good deal, because it's more than 3. And the Rule of 3 is something that we're brought up into. No matter where you are in the world, you got read a bedtime story, you got told a bedtime story. And the most popular one is the Goldilocks theory, right? 3 times decisions, three decisions to make, and then 3 bears showed up. There's 3. And then, I played baseball, 3 strikes, you're out. There's 3 teams on football. It just grows and metastasizes. And politicians, they say, I'm going to lower taxes. I'm going to get you more jobs. And we're going to make sure this area is secure. Whatever the 3 things are, makes it completely ingrained into your brain as a complete cycle. So as a leader, if you give somebody more than 3 things, they aren't doing any of it. And so we're going to talk about this as we go into the book. But you're right. If you take the chaos and you make it just 3 things, that's manageable. If you make it 1 thing, it's going to get done. That's just how it works. The book, The One Thing, talks about it.
Yeah.
And he says, we spend most of our day. I'm going to use my fake stacks of money here.
Yeah.
So I got my Hollywood money, right? So
for those of you listening on the podcast, on the audio version, he's got a stack of fake money here.
Prop money. $50,000 represented in $100 bills. It's Hollywood money for sure. But like, this represents how much in seconds you get every day. And most people see this 5 stacks and they go, well, I got lots of time. And then they get down to the end and they're like, well, I ain't got much time. So everything happens in the last minute. If you wait till the last minute, it only takes a minute, except for whatever gets produced is not usually that good. So what happens whenever you start taking this stack is, in the book, he says, you spend 33% of your time switching between tasks. So I'm taking 2 stacks off of this, which means I got $30,000, right? Worth of money that I'm going to spend, worth of seconds that I'm going to spend. Well, let's make this bigger. Let's talk about it in a month, and let's pare it down to 25%. That means if it's a 4-week month, one of those weeks is switching between tasks. Let me go a little bit bigger. That means in every year, 4 months of your year is switching between tasks. Now let me make it a little bit bigger. 4 years. We go 25. That's 2.5 years, but really 2.5 to 4 years because of technology. Because technology helps you switch between tasks. Yeah, right. It gets you engaged in something else. Yeah. So now you're spending 6 years of things that you can actually do instead of 10. And how you do the prioritize and execute is you focus on the one thing, that one target is what I like to say. You pick that one target, you hit that, you move on to the next. And people ask you the question they always ask us: how are you doing so much? How do you get all this done in one day? And, it's easy. It's just not, it's not simple. for you to execute. Well, it takes a lot of habit changing for you to be like me. And a lot of people don't like that because they want to live in the chaos, and they call that comfort. And that comfort chaos will creep up and kill you. And by the end of your life, you're going to be asking, well, what happened? Well, I thought I had more time. And the reality is you just didn't prioritize correctly because you lead your life. No one else does that for you. So it's on you again to figure out what that looks like. Or you can spend all the stacks that you have in your life switching between tasks and not doing anything. That's the chaos that we talk about. That's the fog of war. That's the decision cycle. That is the problem. That's it. And the crux. I'm 100% with you. That is the core. What he calls what is it? The laws of combat: cover, move, simple, keep it simple, prioritize and execute. Decentralized command. That's all. That's all on you. Decentralized command. It's the easiest thing to do whenever you find somebody who's an expert at whatever it is you're trying to do, and you say, how much time and money do you need? Mysteriously, it doesn't cost as much as if you tried to do it all yourself. And that's just a life hack right there that I'm trying to tell people all the time. You can get a lot more done if you find the right person to do it. And usually it's not you.
No, those are excellent points. I want to bring in, and I have to do this at least once per podcast. And it's ironic that I'm doing it with Jocko, because Jocko and Leif's book, because as I was saying to you before offline, he and I weirdly share, other than the military piece, which we share a lot of weird parallels. So he plays guitar, I play guitar.
Play guitar.
Yeah. He owns a leadership consultancy. I own a leadership consultancy. He's written books. I've written books. It's weird. And now this is the other parallel. I started doing, now, obviously he's been doing jiu-jitsu way the heck longer than I have, but I started doing jiu-jitsu a couple of years ago. And, starting jiu-jitsu in your 40s is different than starting your jiu-jitsu when you're a hard charging 20-year-old special forces guy. Radically different, right? And I came through combat taekwondo. I've hit people in the face. I've gotten hit in the face, and I know how the deal goes, right? And I always resisted jiu-jitsu because, number one, my principle was I'm never going to give you the opportunity to throw me to the ground. That's number one. And then number two, I'm going to run away from you. So after that, what do you have? Like, if I just run away from you, I'm fairly sure I can outrun you a long enough timeline. Fairly sure I can. I'm pretty fast. My knees used to held up. You have held up pretty well.
I don't know, man. I'm a truck foo kind of guy. If I can run you over, that's what I'm gonna do. That. Oh, you want to fight? I'll be right back.
That's right.
What are you saying now?
And so, but then what happened, and the weird thing in my life is what happened is I started playing rugby, and I played rugby for many, many years. Okay. And rugby got me into the idea got me comfortable with the idea of being under a dog pile and getting tackled and all this, because I didn't do any of that kind of stuff when I was in high school. That wasn't where my interests were. Okay. Fast forward a few years, I'm looking around for something to do. I'm a little bit bored. I'm like, okay, fine. Jocko's been banging on me for 10 years about this jiu-jitsu thing. Fine, I'll go do jiu-jitsu. I remember the first time I rolled with my instructor, who's a former battalion commander from Afghanistan. And I've actually had him on the podcast as well. And I sat down, and I'm never a person who thinks I'm a pardon my use of the term. I don't think I'm a badass. Like I think I'm a person who's, if you screw with me, there's going to be something that's going to happen that you won't like.
Yeah.
But I'm not going out and seeking it, because why would I? I have other things I need to do in my life. Plus, I'm an adult, and lawsuits suck, and going to jail sucks. I don't have time for any of that. I have different priorities. I prioritize
it.
Exactly.
Yes.
I prioritize different things. And I'm not 20 anymore, so I'm not going out drinking and nonsense. Anyway, point is, I sat down that very first time after the first 5 minute, oh, we're gonna go. And number one, I realized how much I don't know about fighting on the ground. That was number one. And then number two, the second thought right behind that was, Well, I guess this is gonna be another one of those. It takes 10 years to be an overnight success kind of things.
At least 5.
Well, in my case, in your 40s, it's 10. It goes up for every decade. It doubles every decade. I keep telling people now I'm on the 15-year plan. I might be a black belt in 15 years. I'm not going to worry about it. Let's see if the body holds up first. But the point that he makes about things being simple but not easy,
Yeah,
I see that all of the time in jiu-jitsu.
everywhere. Yeah.
And I'm a measly white belt. I'm not even a friggin' blue belt anymore. I probably shouldn't be talking about this. I'm a measly white belt, right? But even a measly white belt like myself, who comes from a background of training and development and teaching and academics, understands how hard it is to make complicated concepts simple, understands that number one, it's great to have a plan. And number two, it's great to have a simple plan, but it's not easy to execute that simple plan.
True.
And jiu-jitsu is a good example of, you're going to have a simple plan, but that other person's going to get a vote.
Yeah.
And there goes your simple plan.
Yeah, the enemy gets a vote. That's what we always say. He puts it in his book, I think, too. But the enemy gets a vote. You're always going to have that hard side. And that's what makes it interesting. That's where I'm at with that. But yeah. You got a lot of parallels with Jocko.
A weird number. And I've thought about that only recently. And it's one of those things that I sort of think about, and then I shunt that door real quick. And I'm like, I got to close that door. I can't get too focused on that.
You opened it. So let me ask you this. Do you think, all those things that you described are things that I do as well? I've done mixed martial arts. I've done, I was a combatives instructor in a Marine line combatives, which is all jiu-jitsu.
Yep.
I play guitar quite frequently. I have a guitar problem, I think. I don't know. It's not hoarding if you just like collecting guitars, right? That's not hoarding, right?
No, that's not hoarding. No.
Okay. That's thank you for,
You're welcome.
But like leadership consulting, I do that a lot. And I've written books, and like the podcasting world is something that's extremely interesting to me. I don't have a podcast yet. I always like to say that. But there's a lot of parallels. Let me ask you this. Do you think it's because we're just built different?
So I believe in uniqueness for like the country of the United States of America. I believe that we have a unique proposition because of our particular founding documents and our creed and the path that we've gone through. Now, what has happened in the last 40 years, that's a different story. But I do believe in the uniqueness of the United States as a national state polity, right, in the history of the world. I think they will be writing, if we collapse, they will be writing books about us and papers for centuries. Forget the Roman Empire, just for centuries, right?
Yep.
How did this actually work?
Yeah.
But do I believe in the uniqueness of human beings? I believe that we are all made unique in the image of God, for sure, because I'm a strong Christian in that space. And by the way, you talked about the rule of three. Interestingly enough, just a side note on that, you've got the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
My whole book is biblical. I just don't tell people because people immediately shut it down. Like the rule of three, like your top 3 people. Jesus had he had 9 followers and then top 3 people. He had top 3. So like the rule of 3 and people who influence you, all of that stuff comes out of the Bible. I got so many parallels to what works in leadership and what works with Christianity. But I just don't talk about it because people immediately dismiss it. They're like, well, why is this? It's a biblical book. It is, but it's just stuff that works.
Well, it's about this. The Bible itself is about the structure of reality.
Yes.
That's what it's about. Now you can object to that structure. You can have friction. Iron can sharpen iron against that structure. Yeah. You can even, as we have attempted to do for the last 150 years in the West, you can attempt to dislodge that foundation stone from the underpinnings of Western culture and see if it'll still stand up. You can try all of that, but the book, I said this in the context of a different book that we were talking about in a previous episode, but the book defies the algorithm.
It does.
The book goes against that. So I believe, to kind of answer your question about the uniqueness piece, do I think that we're unique? I think that we are unique as individuals in the sight of an almighty God. Absolutely, for sure, 100%. And of course, we should work on our salvation with fear and trembling, as a man named Paul once said. But I also believe that in the world in which we live, with the types of opportunities that have been offered up to us, the parallels between people are more than accidental. I believe they're fundamentally on purpose, because I believe
that too.
the universe, I believe that God operates both, what do you call it? With free will and on purpose. And so both those things work together. And don't come at me about predeterminism. All the Calvinists can hold your chest, Calvinists. It's okay. All you out there who are listening to me, it's okay. Just hold on. But I do believe in free will, and I do believe in predestination, and I do believe all these things operating together. But I also believe it's a great mystery, again, to go back to Paul, and we can't really pull it apart because it's like gossamer. So I believe that people do share certain paths, but where people diverge and what the ping pong balls are, or the billiard balls, actually, how we click off of each other, I believe that's out of our control. But I think it's a great thing to think about.
Yeah. Okay. We'll get back into the book. I'm sure we're getting ready to go back in the book, but let me pull this thread. One more.
Yeah, go ahead.
One more. So between what you're seeing is these people who are making changes in the world have the same influential background. You're working on yourself and your physical strength by doing jujitsu. You're working on your ability to express yourself by playing the guitar. There's a creative side that happens there. You're putting something out into the world that's going to help people for free. It's a podcast. And then you're helping people because you can't give away things that you don't have. You have to have something that gives you money. You're getting money so that you can give it away. And like all of the things that you just described are the same things that Jocko has in his life, because you guys are basically doing the same good mission that I think we're all called to do. And like, you become these people. Like, you're in your 40s, I'm in my 40s. But like, when you become these people, you start looking at who you want to associate with, who you want to be like, who you want to be. And whenever you start focusing on you, well, then the world changes, doesn't it? Because you realize it's not about you, it's about everyone else.
It ties into what she said, in the beginning of our conversation today. The self-awareness that's required to prioritize and execute effectively. Which is, this course, the same self-awareness it's required to check the ego, engage in extreme ownership, understand that it's not the team's fault, it's your fault.
That's right.
I mean, and by the way, to be able to, do I always accept feedback? Well, no. There are people in my family who will tell you, hey, son, is horrible accepting feedback. Honestly, it depends upon which mood you're approaching me and what the kind of feedback is. There's a couple of different things, going on underneath there. But what I tell my clients is, feedback is the gift that's given to you in order to get you to grow more in self-awareness. And most of us don't treat, even myself, I'm guilty of this sometimes, don't treat feedback as a gift. We treat it as a threat. And fundamentally, our biology is wired that way. And we are responsible, I think, at an individual level. You talked about, are we unique? I think at an individual level, we are responsible for overcoming our own biology. And by overcoming, I don't mean altering our biology, through surgical means or medical means. That's not what I'm talking about. I mean, overcoming our base desires, our base appetites, rising above, again, because those things are going to exist. Maslow's hierarchy of needs exists because Maslow understood that there was a hierarchy of needs.
Correct.
But that hierarchy of needs is just at the bottom level of where the rest of the things in the hierarchy should be.
It's true. It's absolutely true. The discovery of something that exists, and then furthering your decision to get into it, it opens up so many parallels that then expand someone else's ability to make an impact. So, wow, that's deep, bro. I'm sorry. I'll leave you alone. Let's go back to
no, you're good. No, you're good. Well, and the other thing is, and I'm writing a whole chapter about this in my fourth book. It's hopefully going to be upcoming here in about a year. Because I think what we've done with the internet, let me bounce this idea off. You can think about this while I'm talking about Jocko and about part 3, which is how do we sustain victory. What we've done with the internet is we've caused a revolution to begin. So the commercial internet got turned on by Timothy Berners-Lee in 1989. And once the commercial internet got turned on, it started with email and AOL, and a little server called a little browser called Netscape that was built by a couple of kids in Illinois, who eventually became, Mark Andreessen and a couple of other folks out there in Silicon Valley who are now worth billions of dollars and are techno optimists. Okay, it's been a long, strange trip. I was there at the beginning of it. It's been really interesting. You were there at the beginning of it. A lot of us were there at the beginning of it. But a lot more of us, we now have 2 or 3 generations now, getting ready to be 4 generations that have just been born into it with it just being there.
Yep.
The revolution that we started, we will not fully be able to take I believe, measure of for probably another 500 years. Because what happened with the turning on of the internet was as revolutionary an act of human engagement as was the printing press. Mm-hmm. And when the printing press finally got promulgated, wars happened, revolutions happened, but also reformations and renaissances happened. All of Luther's Reformation, all the Protestant Revolution and the Protestant Reformation, none of that would have happened without the printing press and without mass distribution. Okay. The same thing is happening right now with the internet, and the internet is an engagement machine. And so now you and I, who share similar life paths, but before the internet, may never have sent a letter to each other. Now we can connect here.
And not even leave our house.
Not even leave our house. I can even reach out to, I was joking with one of my former employees because he was a big Joe Rogan. He's a big Joe Rogan fan. He's like, oh, you can't get Joe Rogan. I literally dead-eyed him, and I go, he's a young kid. He was only like maybe 19 or 20 at the time. I said, anybody can be gotten with the internet anywhere. I can go get Joe Rogan. It's just a matter of time.
It's going to be, you have to wear him down.
Right. Or I just have to do enough good work. We all have to do enough good work to create those engagements and create those connections through our content. Yeah. And now the internet is this big sampling and connection and narrowcasting machine that's creating revolutions that, to quote from Malcolm X, take land, they take property. That's what a revolution does. And he was exactly right.
Yeah, he was exactly right. And no, with Joe Rogan, you're absolutely right. The thing I sent to his booking agent last was, I'll earn it. He's like, Joe hasn't said anything yet. I said, that's cool. I'll earn it. But every day I'm providing more and more value of what I can bring to his show.
Right.
So I'm showing him all the things that I can bring to his show, because you're right. Absolutely. Anyone can talk to anyone now. And that is not something that existed when we were growing up in the 80s and 90s. That is not something that is far-fetched.
It's a massive upending. And we don't really appreciate how much things have been upended, but we are going to. We're going to.
Well, yeah, it goes right into where we're going in the book.
It does. Back to the book. Speaking of which, back to the book. Back to Extreme Ownership, How U.S. Navy SEALs Lead and Win, by Jocko, Willink, and Leif Babin. As already has been pointed out, the version that I have and one of the versions that Atlas has the New York Times #1 bestseller, a ribbon across the front with a new forward and Q&A section. By the way, the Q&A section comes directly from questions asked to Jocko or emailed into his show, or emailed into him from listeners of his show. Sorry, that's how I wanted to frame that. By the way, I've also read a number of other of Jocko's books, including Leadership Strategy and Tactics, The Dichotomy of Leadership, the Leadership Field Manual, the big thick one, and a couple of other ones that he's put out there. So as you can tell, I'm a huge proponent of what Jocko's putting out here today, and Leif as well. All right, part 3, sustaining victory. So it begins with chapter 9. We're talking about a hostage rescue occurring in Ramadi, right? The rescue of a young Iraqi teenager who had been kidnapped by an Al-Qaeda linked terrorist group who demanded that his family pay $50,000 in ransom for his release. By the way, task unit Bruiser, the task unit that that Jocko and Leif led, which also included Mark Lee and Chris Kyle, he of American Sniper fame. Yep. Were the ones who were engaging quite a bit in Ramadi, and all of these experiences that he talks about, the Leif and Jocko talk about in the book, come out of those experiences, including this hostage rescue, which apparently we did on the regular. Now, the point of this first piece around planning, and I love, by the way, just as a side note, I love in the chapter on planning where he talks about how Mark Lee quoted the line from Michael Biehn in the 1990 movie.
We don't exist.
And I quote from Michael Biehn, "We're a SEAL team. We're here to get you out. There's no reason to thank us because we don't exist. You never saw us. This never happened." Dead eyes, they kid.
I'm telling you, like, these guys. Well, okay, so combat brings out a point of humor that no one really understands unless they're there. Yeah. Like, comedians do a great job of pointing out what everyone thinks but doesn't say.
Right.
And war does the same thing. So you find yourself laughing at the points where you probably shouldn't be laughing. and I can just see this happening. I wasn't there, obviously, but like I can just see this happening and I can totally tell you what happened. I could see it. I mean, this is what on the regular, these guys are hilarious like that. So,
well, and I think you have to be, because humor is that thing that just releases all the pressure and the tension and the stress, because you can't be down in the mouth all of the time. I mean, you just have bullets flying past your head. Come on. It's fine. It's another day in paradise. It's fine.
Well, and it never stops either, man, because I was on a podcast with a Green Beret and a SEAL called Harder Not Smarter. They just started a podcast recently. And these guys are still the same funny, man. And they're still jabbing me. And their humor is on point, and it's for everyone. So reading that in there too, I mean, I chuckled, but I was like, yeah, that's exactly what was said.
Well, the point of the chapter on planning is for any team, whether it's in business, whether it's in the military, whether it's in industry, whether it's even in your home, right? A standardized planning process is essential. And quite frankly, I agree. The point that's made here is that to the point about goals, right, that Atlas was making earlier, goals are fine for writing those down, but then you have to go in the weeds and you have to figure out what the actual plan is. This is where many entrepreneurs and small business owners fail on the planning piece. They don't fail to do the day-to-day. They fail to document and standardize the plan. And so this chapter was very much about the documentation and the standardization of planning, in addition to a unique process of debriefing, which I was talking about years before I read this book, because I found out that the Special Forces did it, and I thought that's brilliant. This idea of debriefing after an intense engagement and figuring out the answers to one of three, actually figure out the answers to all three questions: what went right, what went wrong, and how can we make this better for the future, whether we are succeeding or failing. When you fail to plan, well, guess what? You're going to get failure. Leading up and down the chain of command is chapter 10, the chapter written by Leif Babin, which makes an important point that many people forget, particularly junior leaders. Junior leaders have a responsibility to lead up the chain, but junior leaders also have a responsibility to lead down the chain. And I would talk about this a lot with managers and supervisors that I train through my consultancy, Leadership Toolbox. And of course, I've written about this in, again, my book, 12 Rules for Leaders. Leading up and down the chain of command means, yes, understanding, as Leif puts it, commander's intent, but it's also paramount that senior leaders and junior leaders understand the big picture and understand where they sit in the big picture in order to effectively lead up and down the chain of command. I'm currently going through, we're not going through, I'm engaged in a project with another individual, and he is senior to me in that project, right? And he has a lot of experience. He has a lot of knowledge. I can't take that away from him. And I realized in reading this chapter, and this is just a thing that happened right now, right? When I was recently rereading this book for the podcast, I need to be leading him better because I'm junior to him, right? But I also need to understand what the overall mission is for the project that we are engaged in. Chapter 11 is about decisiveness and amid uncertainty. How do you take the shot? Now, in my time, I've known a few Marine snipers. Matter of fact, I've known a couple of guys who were literally graduated high school and then went right to Afghanistan in October of 2001. I've known snipers in my time. Matter of fact, I can name offhand 3 people for sure who I know I'm absolutely sure have killed people, for sure. And there is nothing more stressful than being a sniper. I cannot imagine a more stressful or stress-inducing role in the military, because if you're wrong, it's a real problem. Either way. And that's the end of the sentence. And so this chapter begins with Leif Babin relating a story about Chris Kyle looking down a scope and seeing an individual with a scoped weapon in another building and asking, do I take the shot or not? What is happening here? How do you have decisiveness amid uncertainty when outcomes are unclear, when directions are unclear, and even when the process is unclear, and when success is not clearly defined? What does it mean to not be paralyzed by fear? And how do you act? And Atlas already brought this up. How do you act decisively? One of the other points that Leif makes in this chapter is about this idea, and Jocko talks about it a little bit on his podcast as well, this idea of being default aggressive, which many people in the civilian world don't understand what that means. But I frame it this way for managers and leaders. Being default aggressive means always moving forward and taking territory, to paraphrase from George C. Scott as Patton back in that great 1970s movie, Patton. We don't retreat. We let the Hun do that. We're going to grab him by the nose and we're going to kick him in the ass. Mm-hmm. And that's what managers have to do. That's what leaders have to do in many organizations and cultures. And very often in your family, that's what you have to do. But there is a measure to this. And that then goes into the last chapter, chapter 12, the discipline transformation. Discipline equals freedom, and the dichotomy of leadership. Do we want to be default aggressive all of the time? Do we want to be taking ownership everywhere all of the time? Do we want to be telling other people to cover and move and making everything simple all of the time? Or are there no absolutes? Is there some times when maybe it's okay to just step back a little bit and breathe? Is it okay when sometimes when there's chaos and mayhem, particularly maybe around a health problem or a wealth problem, to actually listen to the problem before we make a solution? How do leaders, or propose a solution, how do leaders navigate those dichotomies? That's the point of the dichotomy of leadership. And of course, he expands on this in his book, The Dichotomy of Leadership, which I would also recommend that you pick up. Reading through these last chapters, 9 through 12, and Sustaining Victory, I recalled my experiences at the University of Minnesota. Normally, I don't talk about the University of Minnesota on this podcast, and I don't talk about the people who led me there, not because those experiences were bad, but because I don't want to put the University of Minnesota on blast. And so, but it's been enough time has passed since I've been there. It's been almost 15 years. So I think perhaps I can talk about this now. Mm-hmm. I failed to lead up when I was at the University of Minnesota in an administrative position. I was a young leader with a young team, didn't really know what I was doing, but also the senior leadership who was above me kind of left me there to fend for myself. Matter of fact, I'm thinking of a particular person who I will not name, who, when I asked, what's my plan here? What's my future? The person responded to me by saying, well, you just have to figure that out yourself. I can't tell you that. I can't provide you with that sort of direction. And then he sort of laughed and kept eating his salad at lunch. That's poor leadership. That guy was a poor leader. Or another supervisor that I had, who every time I spoke to him, I felt like I was being politicked. And I inherently, because it happened to me as a young leader, I inherently am sensitive to that now. And I can spot a fake like a dime on the highway at 80 miles an hour. I also thought when I was reading this book, reading this chapter on sustaining victory, of my experiences playing rugby, which I've already mentioned on this podcast. And the rugby team that I was on were a lot of good guys, and they had a lot of good hearts. But the coach lacked decisiveness, and a lack of decisiveness leads to not winning. Lack of decisiveness leads to collapse on the rugby scrum. It leads to collapse in the rugby field. It leads to me standing out there in 20-degree cold in the middle of February or the middle of October or the middle of November, staring into the pack as I'm watching big burly men not able to cover the ball and yelling at each other about who failed what. Not exactly engaged in cover and move, not prioritizing and executing, not having decisiveness amid uncertainty, and not having ownership in leadership starting from the top. No plan always equals no future. My old supervisor at the University of Minnesota was exactly correct about that. So Atlas, there's a lot there, but we're rounding the corner. We're going to talk about solutions to problems.
Yeah.
How can leaders navigate the dichotomies of leadership on their teams? How do we deal with all this? How do we put all this in a box together for folks today?
Yeah, we can sum this up really easily, but it's not going to be simple. Yeah, so realize that there are lots of dichotomies in leadership. Everyone thinks that they know, but management and leadership are two separate things, and you have to let managers manage. And whenever you're asking a manager like you did at the university, what's my plan? You can't expect them to be a leader because they only know how to manage. You nailed it. Not a good leader. Great manager, probably. Not a good leader. And the difference between management and leadership is this. The management sections were in a little over years ago when, oh, let's just line. We can pay people way more money to do something simple. And if they repeat that task over and over again, we could take somebody who's making 30 cents and give them $3 and create what we now know as management. If they manage something that's continuously done over and over again, it's easy for them to manage and they can make sure that it works. And if you put a lot of managers on a line, you need a leader to say, we need to do this many things in this many days, or there needs to be a metric or a future that's described. That all comes together in a plan. So whenever you're looking at the dichotomies, you have to realize there are managers who think they are leaders. And telling them that they're managers is probably going to be a stroke to their ego. And that's okay sometimes, but a lot of times it's not. Giving them a specific task to manage and then say, you're in charge of leading that effort is how it's done today. And so people get confused on management and leadership quite often, and they expect managers to be leaders, and that shouldn't be in your plan. That should be something that you go back to where you started this. Know your people. Know what they're capable of. Know what they're going to produce. And all that's there. And where does that get found out? You nailed it with the debriefs. So there's a rugby team. It's the most winningest team of any sports ever. It's called the All Blacks. And the All Blacks do something that a lot of teams don't do every time. They get done with their play on the ground. They all get into the locker room and they say, you sucked at this, you were great at that, blah, blah, blah. But they're brutally freaking honest. Honesty is something you can't buy, but you can build it. And when you build honesty into a team, you'll figure out who is there for what. And if they're looking for self-preservation, you'll be able to correct that early whenever they start blaming everyone else for something that happened. The people who are true leaders are the ones that take accountability, which is extreme ownership in the book we're talking about. When you find that built-in quality, those are what we call born leaders. But even born leaders have to learn how to grow. So born leaders and people who are learning how to be leaders symbiotically come together whenever you have a hot wash or a debrief. We call them both in the military. And that is what just happened. Let's see if we can do it better next time. And guess what? If you think about it, if you talk about it, if you start figuring out who people are, well, then you become a winning team like the All Blacks. There's nobody who's won more than them, and it's because of their ability to lead up and down the chain of command. They talk to their coaches the same
Mhm.
way that they talk because it's an open forum. The other thing that I love about that team is they all respect each other. They have this environment where they can say whatever they want to say and realize it's not personal, it's business.
Well, wait a minute, Atlas. You don't understand. I get this a lot. This pushback.
But
I'm going to
wait a
push back
minute.
on you.
Yeah,
But wait a
go.
minute. You don't understand. I'm a mid-level manager in a massive bureaucracy, and these people were just given to me.
Yes.
I don't get to sit in on the meetings where they're hired. I don't get to
Yes.
give my input. No one
Yes.
asks me. They rip away my team, or they rip away half or a percentage or a quarter or whatever. And they give me these people that are underdeveloped, underfunded. Then they tell me they want me to do these missions. You don't understand. You were in the
Yep.
military. You could get whatever you wanted, whenever you wanted it, however you wanted it. And I got to work out here with people that can't say, that don't say yes or no, sir. And they come in here with their purple hair, and they come in here with their requirements, and they want to leave at 4:30 in the afternoon on a Monday. And I had to bust my behind to get here. And I've been in this role for 25 years, and I know what you don't get it.
Yeah. Don't you love hearing that?
Oh, I love it. You
You
can
know
tell
what?
I've heard that. You can tell I've heard that quite a bit.
Yeah. I absolutely love that problem because I know what the problem is.
Yeah,
It's them.
it's them.
It's always them. Everybody who gives me that has not figured out that they can ask for the things that they need. They can document the true successes. That the people that are underdeveloped can get trained. The time that they don't have can be made. That all of the things that they describe are things that they just haven't done yet. And they aren't empowered to do it. Or wait a minute, they don't feel like
They don't
they're
feel
empowered.
like they're empowered to do it. That's right.
So the biggest answer to that, whenever I hear it, is I empower you. I
Mhm.
empower you to fix it. I empower you to do it. Or I empower you to leave. And then guess what? Someone else is going to come in here and they're going to be like, I have all these problems that I can fix, not complain about. Because in the military, we hear that often too. The Army likes to say, you have to go to war with the troops you were given, not the troops that you want.
Don
So it's,
Rumsfeld. Don Rumsfeld infamously said that.
huh. It's amazing that somebody at that level is saying, you know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
So, like, I hear that all the time. I do. And it's also because they have not figured out who's on their team. These underdeveloped people probably just don't want to do the job that you hired them to do. And you didn't ask them the questions like you should have when they came in. What are they passionate about? What do they want to contribute? How can I help you contribute what you want to do? Because now they've accepted ownership of something that they've told you, and you are now their coach to help them get something better in life or the company or whatever the mission set is. But yes, I love hearing that because then I absolutely know what to look for. And then I don't know, well, you probably do this too. But whenever I go into a company and then I come back 6 months later, I usually come
Mhm.
back 6 months later.
Yeah.
The people who say that don't work there normally. They're not
Yeah.
there
Usually
anymore.
they're gone. Yeah. Usually they've moved on
They're
other
like, well,
places.
if I can't get what I want, then I'm leaving. And then we're like, bye.
Bye.
Yeah, because somebody else will probably hire you and you can complain about the same things wherever you go because you're going to find the same problems if you're looking for
Shockingly
same
enough, your
problems.
problems will follow you wherever you go because, well,
It's you.
everywhere you look, there you are.
Yes, there you are in the mirror. Which then goes back to uncertainty. They're uncertain on how to fix things. And then that's a higher leadership problem. So usually what I'll end up doing is I'll say, hey, I heard this. I hear this all the time. But, I told them that they're empowered to do this. You need to go in and tell them that they're empowered to do this. That just those words, I empower you to do this, will change the directive if they want the direction, if they want to change. The other thing you need to do is realize that you have a communication problem
Mhm.
because whenever you have that, it's a real problem and it's because you didn't communicate effectively. So it's being muddled, it's being confused, or it's being misread. But you need to clarify what they're able to do, and if they're
The,
leaders or managers.
the lack of communication I'm going to jump
Huge.
in here on this. Huge, right? So in my own personal life, my wife and I, in our marriage, we try to have as clear and as open, even about things we don't like, as clear and open a communication between each other as we possibly
Yeah.
can, because in the hierarchy of the household, I'm the leader, she's the leader, and then we got the kids, we got the
Yep.
troops, right? And
Yep.
then you've got a bunch of other things happening there. And honestly, you know, I'm not at the top of that hierarchy. God's at the top of that hierarchy. Then
Amen.
there's me.
Yeah.
Then, so like, that's how that kind of, that not kind of works. That's how that works.
That's how
Right.
that
And
works.
so clear communication up and down the chain has to occur, so there's no confusion. And the place of conflicts in our marriage has been when clear communication was not there, when things either wanted to be said but were not, or things were inferred from statements that were made that were not tracked to reality. And so we also see this, and I'm not unusual. The only reason I'm bringing this up is because it's a touch point. Most, I believe, fundamentally, many people struggle with communication. And I believe fundamentally leaders struggle with communication, but not in terms of, I'm going to word vomit onto other folks. They've got that part.
Yeah.
It's the expectations of what other people or how other people will communicate with them that creates indecisiveness and uncertainty. So you mentioned the All Blacks. There's an expectation in that culture
that
they're going to there's going to be open communication, and that there's going to be feedback in order to facilitate communication, regardless of the level of talent that you have. We see this in sports and in the military. You see it very, very broadly because it's sharp there, because the outcomes are black and white. Where it gets muddy is when the outcomes are hidden, or they're not black and white, or the outcomes have never been clearly defined. So if you're in a small business, the owner of the small business, even though they may be brilliant and may be a founder and an owner, they are the ceiling on that business. They just
always.
They're always the ceiling on the business.
Unless they hired somebody to manage the business, they're not able to. It's not worth anything because you can't sell that business.
Right, exactly. And so when we work in our consultancy with small businesses, because we had to do this ourselves, first thing you got to do is write down your processes and your procedures and your tasks, right?
AI.
You have to make a plan, right? AI, exactly. Yeah, you have to make a plan. Then after you've written down your processes and your procedures and your task list and your operations, and you've written down your organizational chart, and you've put everything together in a nice package, now you actually have a business. That's a business, because that can survive without you. That you can give to somebody else. Is it harder to do that in a family? Yeah, but not impossible. Is it really hard to do on the other end of that in a civic organization? Maybe, but you should probably be doing that once every 6 months anyway, or once every year anyway. You should be checking in to seeing, are the processes, the procedures, the plan that we have, are we still leading amid uncertainty? Because chaos is the only guarantee. Stability you got to work for.
Yeah, well, I like this because we're going to parallel companies to families now. So most people's priorities are health, wealth, and relationships. It's those three things. And in the book, he talks about leading up and down a chain. He starts looking at the chain of command. When you're a solopreneur or an entrepreneur, whenever you own everything and you're doing everything, the line structure for that is one person does it all. And that's not really a business, just like you said. But when you start to hire people out and you start to do things at a bigger level because you have to, things start to get crazy. And you have to put, like he said in the book, you can only manage up to 6 people. I only think you can manage up to 3, because giving more than 3 people your time looks like this. This is how I used to do it while I was deployed, by the way. So I do what most people do in one day. I do 3 days worth of work in one day because I split it up into this. I go morning day, afternoon day, and evening day. And then my priorities are morning day is usually a podcast. Afternoon day is usually my books and writing, right? My social media, whatever I'm going to post out on that. And then my third day is my family. So I have 3 priorities right there, because wherever you spend your time is where your heart is, right? I mean, I don't even have to say anything about that. You get what I'm saying. So I'm putting my priorities into my timeline like that. And then I'm looking at it each night. And then I'm setting on my next day. and then that's the priority. Where most people get confused is like, okay, I can't change my family, right? So if you can't change your family, if you can't change your work family, then what? What happens? You hire a professional. And this is called consulting or coaching. And what do pro athletes do? They get coached and consulted. What do pro athletes do? They find strength coaches and dietitians. What do pro athletes do? They freaking win or they get off the team. Now, here's the parallel with the family. Sometimes you can't have a winning family member all the time, but they're going to win some of the times. And if you see them winning, if you recognize their wins, guess what happens? They usually win more. And if you find people to come in and help you with them recognizing their wins, your family becomes stronger. Your work family becomes stronger the same way. The difference between your regular family and your work family is if your work family isn't working out, you could find a new family member. All right. And if you're not a family, then you're not really going to succeed for long periods of time. And that all goes back into the book. How many people can you really have in your life? I think it's 3. I'm against what Jocko and Leif say. I think it's 3. Any more than 3, and I'm overwhelmed because I only have 3 parts of my day, and I want to touch you every day and say, hey, how you doing? It's just how I am.
The psychological research on this is clear. I mean, Dunbar's number says anything past, I think it's 9 people, we just can't keep. Oh no, it's not 9 people. Sorry, anything past 150 like different people, we can't keep track. Yeah, we can't keep track of those relationships. And that's because fundamentally, I believe it's because we were created to be in community with each other, and be in community with the Godhead. But if you don't want to buy into any of that, that's fine. Mm-hmm. It's fundamentally because our psychology is wired to reality in a certain way. Let's go there. And reality, it cannot be it cannot be repealed. You can negotiate with it. You can maybe try to shift it a little bit, but you can't repeal it.
You can't. Reality
always gets a vote.
Well, I got to tell you the story though, because chapter 11 really hit me hard.
Yeah.
And referred to in Joint Committee. They're known for a lot of really elite teams. So I was there and I was trying to figure out how these people operated because I've never been around so many people with inflated egos in my life because they've all been told for a long period of time they're the best at what they do. Sure. So when I walked into the position, the person that was in the position before me was managing everything. And they expected me to be another manager. So they're like, hey, we know that you're going to come in here because you're a lieutenant colonel and you have to do your lieutenant colonel job here. And I was like, no, I'm here to lead. I'm going to lead you. And they were like, okay, some of them. But two of them confronted me. And how the confrontation happened is when I walked into the job, there was another person that was hired to do something similar to the job that I was hired to do, to be the chief technology officer for a Joint Special Operations Command. And I won't say his name, but he's a good guy, great guy. He just didn't come from our environment. Mm-hmm. So he didn't know much about the military, especially about special operations. And he had a corporate mindset that he was trying to instill in our special operations community, which has been around for a very long time. The chain of command came from the military. Why? It's thousands of years old and it works.
Yep.
So when he's coming in and trying to insert himself in our chain of command, it didn't really work well. So we had some people that were splitting off and going into his school of thought, and then some people that were staying standard. And what I saw was 2 members, specifically 2 members. And in the book, he talks about meeting with a chief executive who had this technology problem, and the 2 scientists didn't get along with each other. Now, I got along well with the CTO, and so did my boss, the CIO. So everyone got along just well. It just didn't work because we were trying to do the same thing. And we weren't talking. There was no communication there. And he didn't want to talk to me because he saw his level as being above mine, even though I did not answer to him. I did not work for him. I didn't have any authority chained to him at all. So he came in and we just weren't talking. And in fact, we would be in meetings. He would ask me my opinion. He would stop me And then he would keep talking. And I was like, well, that's very disrespectful. So like, I didn't make it a point, but I had the same problem that he talked about in the book. It's like, what are the options? Well, you can get rid of one of them or the other one, or you can do what the book says and get rid of both of them. And so what I did was I started looking at who's on my team and who's on their team. And that's an us and them. Don't do that. That's dangerous. But the reason why I did it was I was trying to help them work for him or whatever they wanted to do. And what I found was this really hard place. So I had two members. These two members wanted to work on his team, and I fueled that the best I could. I created a building for him. I said, what do you need? I found resources, and I tried to push that envelope over there to see what would happen.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't go against them, but what I did was fuel them to do something they were passionate about. And I had another one that was really trying to join us, and I was like, that's just not going to work. The military environment and the corporate environment are different, and that's okay. But I can't adopt the corporate environment in my military environment that works. We're elite for a reason. And it's not because we have somebody else telling us how to be more corporate. It's because we are at this level already, this top level, and we know how to do what we need to do at the most effective levels. He's just trying to bring in technology, which is one of the things that I was hired to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I took one member, pushed him off into that team, and it didn't work. Didn't work at all. So he came to me. He goes, hey, I'm trying. I'm really trying to, and he's not listening to me. I'm like, well, what else do you want to do? He goes, I want to work at this other elite organization. And 2 weeks later, he was there. I let him, I promoted him into another job. And now he's been promoted a couple more times. The other person that wanted to join us together, I was like, that's just not going to happen. And he's like, well, I'm going to quit. And I said, bye. And he got a job working at another executive place somewhere else. And he was happy for a while. And then that guy got mad at me. He's like, he shouldn't have worked there. And I'm like, I just helped him do what he was supposed to do. And that's what he's doing. Now he's back. He's in another executive role back in the military, and he's doing that. But what I learned from that is if you fuel people, if you find out what they're passionate about and you let them do it, it works out well. What happened with this guy, he claimed my wins from my team who was still producing like amazing things. One of the things that Jocko talks about is all these people on different radio nets. And they all have their own different radio nets, and they're all communicating in their own little teams. And one of the things that I did was I paired them all together so that all these elite people could talk to each other. I mean, what? Who would have thought of that, And so he claimed that, and he claimed a lot of our other wins as his own so that he would maintain, I don't know, some kind of, he claimed our wins, really made my team mad, But the people who were on my team, they got promoted. They all got higher ranks for life, not for, because I found out who they really were and what they were really passionate about. And we started producing major wins for an organization that is at the tip of the spear. And he claimed them all. So that was a real hard thing. He's no longer in there. He's doing something else. He took a lot of the elite people that were working for him on that team, and now they have a corporate environment that they all work in. They're all still friends or whatever. I don't really talk to them that much. It looks like they're doing good on social media, but doesn't everyone post their best things on social media?
Everyone posts their highlight reels.
Yeah, the highlights are great. But I didn't want to marry that together because it didn't work.
Right.
And recognizing that is leadership, not management. So the whole thing of being decisive in a period of uncertainty, I was very decisive. I was very meticulous, and we produced wins. And then I let him claim the wins because he went out and mouthpieced them to everybody. And people don't do that. That's the biggest thing. Like, you want to lose communication and be a problematic organization, start getting mad at people for not claiming wins that, or for claiming your wins. Start getting mad. That happens all the time.
Yeah.
And if you just let it happen, your organization gets to a level that you would have never expected it to be at, because the people who are good at talking usually aren't good at doing.
Right.
I'll say it again. The people that are good at talking usually aren't good at doing.
Well,
So
and the
let them
irony,
talk
well, and the
about
irony
what you
is
did.
that the irony, well, everybody needs marketing, right? Apparently.
Yeah.
You know, understanding what people are good at, understanding their internal motivations, understanding your own internal motivations. Um, there's an idea in leadership theory, and I don't expound too many leadership theories only because I think they don't work fundamentally. Because again, leadership is almost an individuated act now.
Hmm.
However, with that being said, there is a leadership theory that says that leaders and members, it's called leader member exchange theory,
Okay.
leaders and members of teams exchange content. Now, I've
Mhm.
always used that in a framing around emotional intelligence. Because yes, we'll exchange status, or we'll exchange wins, or we'll exchange blame, or we'll exchange credit, or we'll exchange feedback, or we'll exchange all of this stuff. We'll exchange hierarchy, money, whatever. But the biggest thing that a leader and a member will exchange is emotional and emotions and emotional exchanges. Our feelings are what we are going to exchange.
Yes.
Feelings of anger, feelings of disappointment, feelings of happiness, feelings of sadness. Those feelings are what we are going to exchange. And until we all get replaced by the Terminator robots, which may be right around the corner, until we all get replaced by them, that's the one thing that only human beings can do well. And we just talked about the internet being this machine of engagement, right? This revolutionary machine of engagement. The things that were prioritized, the exchanges that were prioritized pre-internet are still valuable, but their value has shifted around, and where they show up has shifted around, and how they show up in people's lives has shifted around. One of the things we like to do on this podcast is talk about solutions this year. And this leads us into, this is a segue into the solutions conversation. So you talked about the size of the wins. You talked about knowing your people. You talked about a little bit about blame and credit. I love how you said, you can buy honesty, but you can't buy honesty, but you could build it. I love that. Wrote that down. That's brilliant. Obviously there's applications from the military to the civilian life, military to all these other different places. Military is a bureaucracy, just like any other bureaucracy. You're going to pull something out of there. One of the things that I look at with extreme ownership, and I look at it again as through my lens as a divorce and family mediator, I would sit across the table from two people who used to love each other and now don't.
Yep.
And I would watch a lot of a lack of accountability, a lack of ownership going on at that table, whether accidental or on purpose, whether influenced by other folks or not. If you want to build leaders for tomorrow to solve tomorrow's problems, heck, if you want to build leaders to solve some of today's problems, let's focus on tomorrow's problems, the problems we haven't quite gotten to yet. If you want to build leaders to solve those problems, that act begins at home.
Yeah.
And I'll go even deeper. I said this recently in a shorts episode that you should go back and listen to, episode number 120. Sort of my sharpest shorts episode yet. But I said, paraphrasing from Jesus, telling his disciples that the harvest is much, but the laborers are few. Well, that's directed towards 12 disciples, all of whom were men.
Yes, sir.
And so to the men listening to my podcast, whether you are middle-aged men, older retired men, or young men who have stumbled across this, this is for you. Men have to take ownership of every single thing in their sphere of influence. That means getting up off the couch. That means not relying on playing video games for your entertainment or pornography for your sexual release. It means not looking at social media so much. It means making a plan. It means prioritizing and executing. It means taking ownership of making your bed and cleaning your room. Let's start with that. You don't have to go out and get a job immediately, but maybe taking ownership of the idea that it might be a good idea to go get a job. You're already hardwired to do that. And the ladies who are listening, and there are many women who listen to my podcast, who do you want to be with? Do you want to be with a man who actually takes ownership of every single aspect of his life and his sphere of influence as much as he possibly can? Or do you want to be with the opposite. Because if he's taking ownership of everything in his sphere of influence, then that allows you to take ownership of everything in your sphere of influence. And now those two can come together. And now we can have a real dynamite family and a dynamite team. And if we want to solve the problems of the future, leadership starts at home. And then you role model that for your children. And I'm saying this specifically because Atlas has written books for children, just like Jocko has. And children are the fathers of the future men, right? And they're the fathers of the future daughters, right? That are coming down the pike. Do you want to build intergenerational wealth? There's a lot of talk about building intergenerational wealth. Robert Kiyosaki and many others talk about this idea. Well, generational wealth is more than just money. Money comes and money goes. Shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations used to be the idea in America. And by the way, it still is. What lasts longer than money? Well, the legacy that you give that is a spiritual legacy, the legacy of a 2-parent home, the legacy of appropriate role modeling of ownership. We may not have had much money, but we stayed married and we took ownership of everything in our sphere of influence. And then the child can go off and become the next thing because there's a granite underneath there that cannot be broken. Ownership always has its drawbacks, but ownership also has its privileges. And when Jocko and Leif talk about ownership, they of course use the adjective extreme next to it. And I usually pair this book with the Oz Principle, which is another great book about accountability, because that one gets into the weeds a little bit with how you scale accountability across massive organizations and massive bureaucracies. And that's another book where I read literally the first 10 pages of it, and it was everything that I'd ever heard from any of clients that I'd had in my leadership consultancy, giving me feedback about their problems with accountability, with other people not taking accountability. It was literally everything a complaint I'd ever read. And I thought, who the heck had guts to write this down and publish it? And so if you're going to get extreme ownership, go pick up the Oz Principle. It's written on the conceit of the Wizard of Oz. I recommend that book as well. 2 great books you can pair together. Nice. Talk about the nuts and bolts of ownership and the nuts and bolts of accountability, and then go off and be accountable. And the privileges of ownership, the privileges of accountability are often not talked about because at the moment that we are at right now in our culture, we talk a lot about rights, but not responsibilities. We talk a lot about wanting privileges, but not sacrifices. The idea that comes from Atlas, the idea that comes from Jocko, and from all of the other folks that have come onto my podcast, that have come onto this show, and have talked about their past experiences, particularly military-based experiences, come from a perspective of sacrifice. You sacrifice before you get the privileges. You sacrifice the things that you want today for a better future tomorrow inside of your sphere of influence. And sacrifice doesn't always look like taking a bullet. Sometimes sacrifice looks like not letting your kid have a cell phone at 10 and just committing to picking them up every day so they're not on social media, and so you have a conversation with them. Sometimes sacrifice looks like not having television in your house on 24/7 and maybe just having music on in the background and talking to each other to fill the silence. Sometimes sacrifice looks like not sacrificing meal times with your family because the boss, who isn't going to be there at your funeral, wants a little bit extra out of you. Sacrifice has to come before privilege, and ownership has its privileges. The sacrifice always comes first. Those are some of the lessons I think that we could take from extreme ownership. But I'm going to let Atlas have the last word on this as we round the corner. How can civilians apply these principles? I mean, we've kind of been talking about this entire time, but what's a good summation for us as we round the corner? And by the way, thank you for coming on the show today. This has been an awesome conversation.
For sure.
And I look forward to maybe potentially having you back on in the future.
I love it. Yeah. So how can civilians apply extreme ownership? I think most people are renting their lives, and they look at their lives as rentals. And whenever you're in real estate, when you rent anything, you realize that a rental isn't taken care of as much as an owned house is. So if you own the house, your yard's taken care of. Your house is well painted. Things are cared for a little bit more. When you're renting something, you treat it like a rental. And I think a lot of people's lives, they're treating their lives as a rental. They're driving it as fast as they can. They're showing it off to their friends on social media. They're being as loud as possible with the things that they think that they can tell people that are believable, when in reality, it's not true inside them. Whatever they're showing to people is not truly who they are. They're fake, and people can spot a fake. You've stated this earlier in the show. It's easy for people to spot a fake. The whole phrase is fake it until you make it. That is not something I subscribe to. I think you should talk about it until you make it. I think you should highlight it until you make it, but faking it only brings in other fake people. So if you take that aside and you look at who you really want to be, own it. Don't rent it. When you own it, your yard's going to be tighter, meaning you're going to go to the gym. Your thoughts inside your walls, this brain thing that you have in your head, they're going to be freshly painted. They're not going to be marred up with negativity. You're going to start taking care of the neighbor's trash whenever it rolls into your yard, and you're going to talk to your neighbor instead of just complaining about them. The things that come with ownership are something that we control, but we rarely do nowadays because we are so afraid to talk to other people, especially those that are closest to us and the ones that impact our lives. So I'd say take ownership, stop renting your life, start thinking about things as you should instead of as people tell you you should.
I know you've got books. I know you've got a website. Go ahead. Talk with folks about where they can get a hold of you, where they can see you,
Yeah.
where they can get you, where can we spot that TEDx conversation that you
Yeah.
not conversation, sorry, speech that you dropped. Where can we find you? Where are all the places we can find Atlas Aultman?
Yeah. Google how elite leaders win. You'll find me on a TED stage talking about my time with the president and a lot of general officers, the highest ranking people in the military. And I got very blessed and fortunate to be placed in the places that I was at. But it wasn't me, it was the teams that I got to, find out about, the people that were in my life. Jesus likes to say we be a fisher of men, and I took that to heart. I like to figure out what people really want to do and then fuel that. And I find great success whenever you do that. So the books I have, the Rule of Three is number one in a lot of categories. That talks about a lot of the stories that I learned from these extreme leaders, and some of my personal stories where I'm at. Shows, leaders-kit.com/shows is all the podcasts that I've ever been on. I think there's like 40 or some odd shows that are posted out there if you want to hear more of me. I don't have a podcast yet, but I'm going to do 100 podcasts before I even think about it, because I'm finding great things. Like I wrote down 3 pages of notes from the first time we talked. Just getting a feel for the guest is something that four of the podcast shows that I've been on has done, and those shows are always amazing, and they're award winning for a reason. So, and then I have a Fox leadership series for kids, and that talks about the basics of life as they own themselves as a leader, and allows the parents to connect with their kids at bedtime usually, and ask a series of questions, allowing the parent to share that part of the day where they're leading something that they don't normally share with their kids. So it's a deep connection that forms between the parent and child, and then the child starts to look at the parent more as a leader, rather than someone that provides them everything that they ever wanted. And interestingly enough, the kids not having the cell phone was a Yale study that was published last November.
Mm-hmm.
And they said that kids lead happier lives if they aren't given a smartphone until later in life. And you know why that is because all the negativity that gets pushed out and the positive vibes So it's a weird mixture for kids to try to figure out that chaos that we all figure out later in life, or as you and I did, we grew up with it and it started to become really noisy.
Yeah.
The world's so noisy right now. So that's what, thanks
Awesome.
for letting me plug my stuff.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. No, it was great to have you on. And of course, we are going to have links in the show notes to all of the places where you could find Atlas Aultman, all the places where you could find information about his books, his TED Talk, his leadership courses, his consultancy, everything that he's ever done. We're going to have links to all of that to the show notes below the podcast player of the show you're listening to right now. If you would like to stay on the path with us here at Leadership Toolbox, we have a few things that you may want to consider. We're not as good as Atlas, but we try to worm our way in there. We of course would recommend that you subscribe and like this podcast. Recommend that you tell every single leader that you know that the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast exists. Of course, we love it if you go on Apple, Spotify, drop us 5 stars, subscribe, pass it around your email list. Of course, word of mouth is how this show grows. So tell all of your friends. If you have people who you know won't listen to a podcast or they won't attend a training, how do you get them leadership tools? Well, we have this little book that was released back in April of 2022 called 12 Rules for Leaders, the Foundation of Intentional Leadership. I co-wrote that with my co-author, Bradley Madigan. And in it are the 12 rules, the 12 areas we think that leaders need to know the most about. And we've covered a lot of them today, including ownership and accountability, avoiding the blame credit trap, and many, many other spots. So go pick that up everywhere where you can find books, most notably Amazon, of course. And we have it in Kindle format and, of course, paperback. By the way, I have been promising an audiobook for years now. I should probably get on that. Oh, by the way, there's another Little Red book we have that was Little Red at the time of its release back in 2018. But people started picking it up a little bit over COVID, and I'd recommend that you pick it up as well. It's called My Boss Doesn't Care. 100 Essays on Disrupting Your Workplace by Disrupting Your Boss. There's a nice snazzy red cover with white lettering on it. I recommend you go pick that up if you're finally ready to disrupt your boss and disrupt your workplace, but you don't quite know which form of disruption to prioritize and to execute on. If you are having some uncertainty and a lack of decisiveness, that book is a guide, because you're going to need a map. You're going to need something to help you. And then finally, we have a YouTube channel. You're going to hear the audio of this podcast on their YouTube channel. If you're listening to it on YouTube, you should subscribe to the Leadership Toolbox YouTube channel. We are ticking up our subscriber numbers as we ingest more of this podcast content into those algorithms that I often talk about. I think that's the first time I mentioned algorithms actually on this show, but you should listen and subscribe to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast on YouTube, and of course watch the videos. We have a backlog now of almost 50 videos. Don't worry, we're getting videos up as quickly as we possibly can, and eventually you'll see the video version of this podcast as well with Atlas Aultman, with all the same show notes, all the same information, but we are audio first. We're partisans for audio. And don't worry, Google, we see you operating over there. You and your little AI. We got you covered. And with that, I'd like to thank once again Atlas Aultman for coming on our podcast and joining us today. And as usual, as I always say, we're out. Thank you for listening to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast today. And now that you've made it this far, you should subscribe to the audio version of this show on all the major podcast players, including Apple iTunes, Spotify, YouTube Music, and everywhere else where podcasts are available. There's also a video version of our podcast on our YouTube channel. Like and subscribe to the video version of this podcast on the Leadership Toolbox channel on YouTube. Just search for Leadership Toolbox and hit the subscribe button there on YouTube. And while you're doing that, leave a 5-star review if you like what we're doing here on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Just go below the player and hit 5 stars. We need those reviews to grow, and it's the easiest way to help grow this show. And tell all your friends, of course, in leadership. By the way, if you don't like what we're doing here, well, you can always listen to another leadership show. There are several other good ones out there. At least that's what I've heard. All right. Well, that's it for me.